Hello, and welcome to Political Science 101. Today we are talking about interest groups, and we are on chapter 6, and again, we're in your government book, your political science book. Okay, for chapter 6, we need to explain, we need to look at the learning outcomes, we need to explain what an interest group is and why interest groups form and how interest groups function in American politics. This is kind of tricky. Interest groups often have a negative connotation, and as you learn about them, your ideas about them may or may not change. Identify the various types of interest groups. Discuss how the activities of interest groups help to shape government policymaking, and describe how interest groups are regulated by government. And then, one key thing is I want you to ask yourself, are you a part of an interest group? And that's kind of a surprising question to ask yourself, and to find out, you very well might be a part of an interest group. So the chapter starts out talking about farmers. Do farming jobs, do they need subsidies? Do they need help? Because farming is such a risky business. I grew up in the country, so my ideologies are a little bit different probably from others, but I grew up in the country, and there were large commercial farmers all around, and so my ideas are more pro-farmer and to kind of help them, and that they do need subsidies, and they do face great risks. Even though I lived on a small farm outside of Cincinnati, it was not a working farm by any means, but it was just kind of a fun, what you might call a recreational farm. We did have large gardens. We grew a lot of vegetables. I had a pony. We had pigs that we actually took to the fair for meat. So, had a little taste of that. And then the opposing view is whether, wealthy farmers don't need these subsidies, that, just the poorer ones do, or the ones that have smaller farming plots, because they have insurance or that sort of thing. Okay. And where do you stand, when it comes to farming and that sort of thing? What effect might farm programs have on rural residents who are not farmers? Soybeans are the nation's second largest crop. After corn, half of all U.S. soybeans are exported. They're not even used here in the United States. Many of them to feed Chinese pigs. What benefits might we gain from this trade? And then I love their issues online. Really want to encourage you, especially the one about looking up different websites, if you're a part of an organization or not. I really want to encourage you to do that. You can find the site for the Environmental Working Group, a critic of farm subsidies. And to find arguments to support of the farm programs, visit the website of Farm Bureau at www.fb.org. So I love how they give you websites for opposing views. So I think this is a very good book. Okay. All right. I love how they open with the old saying that there's strength in numbers. It's certainly true in American politics, and we know from what we've studied before that in a democracy, the majority really doesn't need to be protected, because the majority is really the one that rules. So that's you need to understand that, as well as we are tackling interest groups this week. Okay. Some Americans really do believe that the influence of the majority can jeopardize the representative type of democracy that we want in America. And something that I want to point out, a lot of times we throw these terms around about being politically correct. And I think we have to be careful, because I think sometimes we are drawn into that den of, it's just being politically correct. But you need to look at, I think I read this week 300 million United States citizens, when you take 300 million, I'll have to double check that, but when you take 300 million and you're looking at that, you know, and 10%, 12% are African Americans, you know, don't you want, if you're an African American, wouldn't you like if 300 million is all of America and 12% is African Americans, wouldn't you want a McDonald's commercial to see someone that looks like yourself? You know, when I started really rethinking, you know, what is political correctness and what is just representation of a correct representation of our country, you know, and we studied at the beginning of the book about how by the year 2050, there will be more minorities. They will have a larger group percentage than white Caucasians or Caucasians. Okay, so 40% by the year 2050, 40% will be white Caucasians, and 60% will be, and it showed you on that graph. That was a fantastic graph earlier in the book. Let me see if I can find it. The other 60% will be Hispanic population, African American population, you know, Chinese, other populations coming in. And, you know, I began to really rethink and just, you know, ask myself, what is political correctness and what is just an actual representation of my country? Especially like if you're looking, we learned, you know, that FDR was the first president to have someone on his presidential, it's not called a board, his presidential committee that was a woman, okay? And, you know, you can say, well, that's political correctness back with FDR in FDR's time. But honestly, if women make up more than half of the population, wouldn't you want someone on the presidential committee, his cabinet, to represent women? It just makes sense. Sometimes logic is misconstrued as reverse discrimination. You just have to be careful because, you know, I think that there's something very good about a country who tries to take the projection in percentages and tries to apply them in many different areas. Okay, I'm done with that. Interest groups. Okay, well, and we got into that because you want a representative democracy. You want a representation of each kind of person in America to be also represented in government, in entertainment, etc. Okay. All right, an interest group is an organized group of individuals sharing common objectives who actively attempt to influence policymakers. All right, now this is what's crazy, is growing up, I was taught that it was only on one side. Well, that's not true. There are conservative interest groups as well as there are liberal interest groups. And probably if we count them, they're probably very even. They have the same tactics. They get in trouble because they go too far and that sort of thing. And I love how the book goes back and forth to a conservative one, to a liberal one, and back and forth. And they do open up with the NRA, which is very active, National Rifle Association. And they also talk about AARP, which I'm not really sure is leaning one way or the other, because it is for senior citizens and representing their cause and their issues and their concerns. Talks about why they form, and you're petitioning, you know, the government, and you're asking for them to listen to what you're trying to say. I love how they touch on Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote in 1835 that Americans have a tendency to form associations and have perfected the art of pursuing in common the objective of their common desires. So within, Eurocentrism, okay, which is, kind of the world of Europe, and that was one of your words for historical analysis. Within that, Americans are different in that they like joining groups, having clubs, and that sort of thing. So we are a little bit different than other European countries. The more government, the more interest group. And that's really a great argument, and they logically talk about that. Defending interest groups. Again, we have the disturbance theory, entrepreneurial theory, why people get interest groups started. I love how they talk about on page 126, political science have identified various reasons why people join interest groups. Often people have one or more incentives to join such organizations. If a group stands for something that you believe in is very important, you gain considerable satisfaction, taking action with this group. This is a purposive incentive with the root word of purpose. Some people enjoy the camaraderie and sense of belonging that come from associating with other people who share their interests and goals. That enjoyment can be called solidary incentive, which is like solidarity or, sentimental. Some groups offer the members material incentives for joining, such as discounts on products, subscriptions, or group insurance program. These are called material incentives. Okay. Right, so you have those on page 126. All right. How interest groups function in American politics. And this is really, it's tricky. I would like to learn more about interest groups. I think really just going to Washington and seeing their workings, I think would really be helpful, or, watching a documentary on interest groups and explaining kind of what happens, or following someone who is a lobbyist or part of one, heading one up. How they function. An interest group helps bridge the gap between citizen and government, enables the citizen to explain their views on policies to public officials, which that's a good thing. Okay. Interest groups help raise public awareness and inspire action on various issues that you might not know about otherwise. Interest groups often provide public officials with specialized and detailed information that might be difficult to obtain otherwise. Okay. Access to the government. You can lobby members of Congress and talk to them and get their ear, whether it's lunch or, speaking to them. Different lobbyists can do that. Friend of the court, where they can speak directly or indirectly, filing a brief about a court case, giving them some extra knowledge about a subject or something they might not know. Okay, points of access to policymakers. Politics is a contest among different interest groups. It is. They are fighting for their there's so many resources available, and you have all these groups vying for resources, and so it is a contest. Okay, these are lovely. Majoritarianism and elite theory. It's a mouthful. Majoritarianism is the belief that public policy should be set in accordance with the opinions of the majority. And then you have the elite theory that, as a practical matter, the government is controlled by one or more elite groups, typically drawn from the wealthiest members of society. And this is where kind of interest groups kind of fall into some negative and some controversial issues, because multiple elites are competing for power. Who's supporting these interest groups, what money is backing them. Okay, and interest groups are very different from political parties. Okay, and you need to make sure that you understand that. There's different types of interest groups. I would really encourage you on page 128. It has the website. Let me find it. Oh goodness, there's a great website. The Encyclopedia of Associations, to look that up and to see if you're a part of an interest group. Okay, how do interest groups differ from party politics? They're policy specialists. Party politics are policy generalists, so they work in general. Interest groups are usually more tightly organized than a political party, and a political party's main sphere of influence is electoral system. And so, talking about sphere of interest is really important as well. And we will talk about the second part.